Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the last session of the day for our first day here of Shrug. I'd like to thank everyone for attending and also give a shout out to our sponsors that make this event possible. For this session, it'll be Andrew Morris talking about land use and land cover data. And with that, I'll hand it off to Andrew.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrew Morris. I work for the Florida Department of Environmental Protection under DEER, which stands for Department of Environmental Assessment and Restoration. There is a program within there, the Watershed Services Program. I'm buried way down there in the GIS section. To cover first what DEER is tasked with doing, it's charged with monitoring, assessing Florida's water, surface water and groundwater quality, identifying, verifying, and prioritizing pollution problems, developing strategies to resolve the problems, and implement those strategies through comprehensive restoration actions in partnership with local stakeholders. So in short, we develop, adopt Florida's surface water quality standards, monitor and report on surface and groundwater quality, assess rivers, lakes, estuaries, and springs to identify pollution problems, adopt scientific water quality restoration targets, TMDLs, develop and implement restoration plans such as basin management action plans, BMAPs, restoration assurance plans, and nutrient reduction plans in concert with local stakeholders to achieve water quality standards. So each one of these TMDLs, the BMAPs, and I'm not too sure about the restoration plans, but some of the other ones in terms of monitoring, assessing, all use land use in some form to do the analysis. So today I'm going to talk about the structure and kind of what goes into creating a land use database. So if anybody's had a class back in college that talks about photo interpretation, one of the, I would not be surprised if somebody did not bring up this document. It was created back in 1976 by the USGS. It's referred to as the Anderson land use because he is, like most academics, is the first person on the document. The only thing I'm going to show you in this document is the classification breakdown. Here is 9 different classifications that they came up with, but you have to also remember this is for the entire country. It's not just for one state or one area. What happened with Florida is they kind of went in the same direction where they created their own document back in 1999. The Florida Department of Transportation created this document called, we refer to as the FLUX, the Florida Land Use, Land and Forms Classification System. It also kind of broke down its classification into 9 different classifications. The first 7 are exactly the same as the Anderson one. The only Anderson one is they went with tundra and perennial snow and ice, which you don't have here in Florida. So what happened then was they expanded it to include an 8,000 class for transportation, communication, and utilities. The 9,000 class was special classifications. And to my knowledge, there is no database that either we create or one of the water management districts creates that has a 9,000 class polygon anywhere. At one point, I think I do remember seeing one, but I can't remember when and where that was. So let's take another look at another page. So I should go down to, let's go down here first. What I talk about, it's talking about this classification system, there's I'm going to say this word once because it gets me tongue-tied, hierarchical classification. There's a level 1, a level 2, a level 3, and a level 4. If I can bring one of these spreadsheets up, I try to explain it a little clearer. A level 1 classification is the first one from Anderson and also from the Flux. It's urban and built up. These numbers, the 100, come from the Flux, but in the databases, you're actually going to have another digit at the end. So for example, over in the level 4, it'll be 1111. So there's 4 digits, hence 4 levels. So the first level is the 1000 class, and it's the first digit. The second level, you'll have 2 digits, then followed by usually 2 zeros. And then the level 3, 3 digits, followed by another digit, usually a 0. And then a level 4 is referring to all 4 of the digits. So for level 1, you can classify something as urban and built up, or you can be a little more specific and call it 1100 and say residential, being a low density, less than 2 dwellings. And then a level 3, you can be more specific than that, saying it's a fixed single family unit. And then level 4, which I don't think anybody uses, and in fact, I know nobody uses it. It talks about the stories of the units for single family units. There is stories referred to when it comes to multiple dwelling units. So in high density, they'll talk about if it's greater than 2 stories or less than 2 stories, because a high rise is greater than three stories. And then for a low rise, it's 2 stories, and apparently the rest of the text has been missing. So this is what we talk about for the hierarchical classification, where you have a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3 and 4. So going back to this one, I'll go back up to here. So the Flux document gives a description of the level 1 just as a urban and built up context. It's not as specific to what you need to look for every single case. So as you scroll down, there's another somewhat generic description for all the residential ones. After you get down there, there's no description for the level 2s or the level 3s. So I'm going to show you a document that actually has all that stuff, but first I want to show you a couple things in here. And let me go back to this one. So in this document, there's above, and then this is the appendix. The appendix actually lists everything that they created all the way down to level 4s, which there's a lot of these that nobody ever uses. There's also codes in here we never use, and some of the ones that I'll explain why. And I think I'm going to get that right now. So under light industrial, other light industrial, there's a 1550. So you can be more specific and say, oh, I can tell based on aerial imagery that this is a boat building and repair place. What would be the characteristics? It's near a river, it's next to the coast. You have boat ramps for large boats mostly, because they're building larger ships than your normal 18-foot boats. There's also electrical stuff, electrical industries. This is a little harder. I'm going to talk about ancillary data later on, and this comes into play where you can actually identify some of these, but you can't identify all of them. I guarantee that. When it comes to furniture manufacturing, where does this take place? Does it take place outside where an aerial imagery can see what's going on? Most likely not. It's going to be indoors. So can you or anybody identify a furniture manufacturer from an aerial imagery without using ancillary data? I think the answer is no. Aircraft building and repair, yes. Container manufacturing, I'm not 100% sure what they mean by that. Mobile home manufacturing, probably yes. Some of that's done indoors, but some of it might be done outside. So my point with this would be, yes, we can get to a level 3 for other light industrial, but can you get to a level 4 on some of these? And I think the answer is no for most of them, and yes for some. And that's why I do believe only a handful of these are actually used in the data that we look at. All right, so okay. When we look at the descriptions for these and we think about what we're doing, what are we trying to do? We're trying to identify areas, spatial areas on the Earth's surface that are used in particular land use. One of the things I'm going to talk about now is why just land use? Do we do just land use and not land cover? No, we do them both. There's some groups, like a lot of biologists, don't want the land use, they want the land cover because they want to know where all the bugs and bunnies are. And you can't get that from a land use of a certain type of land use. It won't give you a characteristic that tells you what kind of vegetation or animals will be there. So they want to use the land cover. That's why there's 2 attributes in most of these databases where it talks about one and another. This document is an older version of what we do. And I guess I can explain that to you right now. Right now, there is 5 water management districts in Florida. Every water management district creates their own land use database. 85, 90% of it is all based on this flux document. Some of it is not, because it doesn't fit in with what they need. So we here at DEP, it started back in 2004, I do believe, 2005. These 2 water management, the Northwest Florida and Swanny River water management districts, needed to update their land use. They didn't have the time, the resources, the manpower to do it. We, as DEER, needed it for what I mentioned before, the TMDLs and the BMAPs and so forth. So we took it upon ourselves with support from the water management districts to create their databases. We hired a consultant. We brought in 4 people, photo interpreters, went through the cycle of building from scratch a database based on 2004 imagery. And for each one of these water management districts, every 3 years since, there has been a new database built for their water management district. We just finished back in July, I think it was, the Northwest Florida Water Management District. It was delayed a couple times because of imagery, and I'll get into that later. But then right after that, we started on the Swanny River. And we've decided to break some of these into 2 portions, like a phase 1 and a phase 2. So for Swanny River, everything west of the river is one phase and everything east of the river is another phase. We just happen to start on the west phase in July or August, and he should be done, our 1 photo interpreter should be done by the middle of next month with that. And then I will take that and incorporate it into the statewide. This image is out of date. Haven't got it up to updating it. In fact, I ran across it, and so, okay, I'll use it. I'll go into the attribute and the schema of this in a little bit, but let me go back to talking about what drives our classification system. So our photo interpreter is Alan Bachhaus. This is myself, and then the environment administrator now, she's my boss. She covers this. This document is what we call is the PI key, photo interpreter key. It explains what you should be looking for when you come across something. And anything you see will fit into one of these 384 pages and give you an idea of where it should fall in. So there's each code has a PI key layout, and in each layout is this. You have levels. It explains what level you're looking at, either a class 1, level 1, 2, 3, or 4. It tells you about the minimum mapping units, and the MMU refers to how big of a delineation should you make. There's some delineations that need to be very large and some need to be very small. And as time progressed over the last 20 years, imagery has gotten better and better. And based on resolution, when you have a 6-inch or a 3-inch resolution on imagery, you can identify things much clearer, and therefore you may be able to drop your MMU from 2 acres down to 1 acre or even lower. It has a description, talks about the general explanation of the classification, some usually bulleted keys to look for. It gives you a context of some kind. There's some similar classes that I may reference saying, okay, well, you're reading this one, is like, you could actually go to these other ones and see if those are actually better suited to what you're looking at. So you may have an idea when you start looking at something, and then this could point you in another direction if there's something else that actually is better suited for what you're looking at. There are special mapping conventions. There's something called dual coding convention. Dual code refers to if you have a land use of one type, what land cover is most appropriate for that. So going back to the boat building, will you have a boat building land use and a golf course as the land cover? Simply no. So in this document, it will list some of the acceptable dual code conventions. And there's a lot of these that don't have a dual code convention. When you call a golf course as the land use, your cover is also a golf course. Some people say you can open it up and use whatever you want. To keep things, I'm not sure what the right word would be, but to standardize it, I think all of the water managements have gone this way too. They don't let things go out of control to where you're using multiple different covers for one particular kind of land use. There are certain ones, like all the low residential, at least for the Northwest and Swanny River water management districts, you cannot have the same dual code as the land use as the land cover. So there's no low residential fixed single family unit as the land use and the land cover. It's got a mandatory, hence the next one down, mandatory dual code associated with it. There's some codes that are only land cover. There is a 1940, which is not in the flux. It was added by us, and it talks about grass surfaces. There is the Panhandle all the way over to Alachua. There's a lot of different variations of residential property. You have very small manicured lawns, half acre or smaller. And if you have a mandatory dual code for those, what kind of cover do you want associated with it? The only other option in the flux that we had was a 3100, which is a natural herbaceous, just it grows naturally. It was decided a long time ago that that is probably not the best case for a lot of the low residential home codes that we had. So we created this grass surface code, and there's a description for it in this PI key. So the other thing it's going to have for each one of the classifications is it's going to have an aerial image, and it's also going to have a picture. The picture is not all associated with that particular aerial image. So let me go take a quick look at one of these. All right, so before I jump that, there is an 1100, which is a level 2. It should say in here, and it says this level 2 class is not part of the database. So it has been decided that based on our resolution or imagery, we should not use this. You should be using one of these 4 other codes. We have the confidence that we can tell the difference between just a single family unit or a mobile home or combination, and then the generic of just an 1100 low residential. Some of the other water management districts don't do that, and you'd have to actually talk to them why. This particular place doesn't talk about the MMU. There's actually a 1000 sheet in here, also not part of the database. It talks about the level 2s, and this is where it talks about the MMU. So in this particular case, it's 2 acres, with the exception of cemeteries, which are half acre. This has been skewed a little as the years progress with the better imagery, to where it doesn't seem realistic that you're out in the middle of the panhandle in a wooded forest to take 2 acres when the parcel from the cadastral, your ancillary data, is only showing that's a half acre. So we've decided that, yes, these are guidelines. We will follow it for the most part, but we can skew it a little and kind of do what we want in a sense. So going back to this one, we have the level 1s, talks about the urban and built up, the residential low density residential, and then the level 3 is the fixed single family unit. It talks, there's a description, some bullets of kind of what to look for, context. This is a generic one. Land use is found throughout the panhandle, yeah. Similar classes could be more of a medium density single family unit where your number of dwellings is higher than the 2 per acre. So it's 2 dwellings per acre for low. It's 2 or up to 5 for medium. Well, what if it's 3 and it's 1.1 acres? There's a lot of things that are in the gray area. And I'll get to that later when we're actually looking at some imagery. So then there's special mapping conventions, and then there's the dual codes. So this dual code actually section lists out some of the dual codes. 1940 is the grass service and so forth. You can pretty much have almost all of the different codes, mostly with the exception of the 14, 15s, 16s. Now that I'm thinking about it, a lot less. But you can have all the 3000s, all the 4000s, most, if not all of the 6000s, with the exception like mangroves and gum swamps and that kind of stuff as the land cover. You can have a 7000. You're not going to have any 8000 in transportation. No, that's not going to happen. So this is where you're going to have a kind of a general, this is a picture of low residential, home, 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 home. There's multiple homes, but the cover in this case, do you all call it grass, or there's a kind of, this is another gray area. So there's an image for that, and then there's a local one, and you can tell this is probably not associated with this image. This is probably here somewhere in Tallahassee. All right, so let me see if I can scroll down. Okay, so I was going to do a quick look at it, the 8,000s too. It's got a 2-acre MMU. These are the 3 different types of level 2s we have. The 8,000 is not part of the database. This 8,100 is not part of the database, but all of these underneath it are. So it also has that 2-acre MMU with the exception. And the exception applies to a couple things. None of them, grass airports. There's a couple of helipads that we've identified out in the national forests and a couple other places that we've put in as grass airports. But so I'll skip down to the 82s. Too far. So the 82 is the communication, and that is one of the, oh, wow. I wish this was a PDF. So yeah, 82. There is only one level 2 for 82s. There is nothing else. And I say that because in the flux, if you go back to the flux for 82, so what am I looking at? It's 80. Yeah, 82. They list even some level 3s in here, or excuse me, level 4s. Looking at an aerial image, it's very hard to tell where there's a radio television transmission tower versus a microwave versus a navigation system. Same thing with some of these other ones, telephone, radio, telephone. So it has been determined that we can only identify one out of these. We don't even have under construction in here. All right. So going back to this, I think I've covered most of the PI key in how it relates to what what you look at on an image is driven by here. With the exception, what is also the driver is imagery itself. So let me go to this one. So for Swanny and Northwest, these are the counties that we deal with. Jefferson is in both Swanny and Northwest. The aerial imagery is flown every 3 years. There are exceptions, like Levy was flown not in 2007, but in 2008, and then 2011, then it went back on its cycle of the rest of the panhandle. The Department of Revenue pays the money to get flights done. This is a document they put out every year, and it's updated every year. So looking at this, it's a timeline. So all of this, the panhandle is now going to get flown in 2021 and 2022. And the reason they do that is they want leaf off is what they refer to it. So you can see through the canopies and you can see basically what's underneath. and they have to do that in the wintertime. So they do it in the wintertime, but it could be anywhere between October, November, December, and then into the next year, January, February, and even into late March. They don't have one contractor fly the entire thing. They'll contract it out where they'll spread the wealth. They'll get like 4 different contracts going, and each contractor will do like 3 or 4 counties, usually consecutive next to each other. And so they'll do that in whatever month that I don't know if it's driven by DOR or DOT, which is kind of the main entity behind getting imagery. I don't know if it's driven by DOR or DOT, but they could fly, as I said, in October and March. That dictates when you get imagery. So getting the imagery in August, 7 months after the new year began, even though the imagery was probably flown 10 months earlier, back in October, you're already behind the ball in terms of, wait, when's our next land use coming out? Well, we haven't even got the imagery yet. And then it takes anywhere from a month or more to do a county, depending on how big these counties, like Santa Rosa County, I think it's 700,000 acres. Usually a photo interpreter can do roughly 380,000 to 400,000 acres a month. So some counties get done quick, some counties get done, takes more time. Also, it depends on what they're looking at, the type of vegetation. If it's a lot of ag land, large parcel ag, it may go quicker. You get down to the cities where there's tons and tons of little parcels, and verifying that they are what they say they are is it's time consuming. You can take a break every 45 minutes to an hour because your eyes will die at the end of 8 hours. So the cycle of imagery drives when the production of land use is available, and therefore the imagery itself is what actually drives the delineation. I'll get to that in a minute. But so the delineation part, I did want to bring up 2 things. So we do it based on aerial imagery. There is some land use that is not based on aerial imagery and is based on delineating it by parcel. So this is the City of Tallahassee, Leon County zoning and land use, and I have one of these has the land use, I forget which one it is. I guess it's the existing, the existing land use. There's a future one, that's what I'm gotten confused with. But each one of these has kind of its own classification. And you can see it here. They have a number, I'm like 20, 25 different classifications. We have over 200 in the statewide because we have different variations of landscapes. So you need different variations of land use classification. But what I was getting at is some of this is parcel. Like that's a parcel. It's a single thatch detached mobile home. What we do is not parcel. Some of the other, I was listening to a session earlier talking about FSED, which is the Florida Department of Agriculture database where they do water demand. They don't only use cadastral/parcel data, but they do use it along with whatever land use data they use, which I know that they use the Water Management District's data, but they also modify some data based on USGS information and in-house stuff too. Kind of It's been a while since I looked at the FSED database. So we don't do parcel. Some people do. And so that's kind of all I needed to say about that. Let me look at the PI key for Southwest. This is the 2014 PI key. As of less than a month ago, I found out that now they have a 2020 data layer. Right now, what's in the statewide is the 2017 data layer. So I don't even have PI keys for both of those. But looking back at the 2014, you can say, okay, give me a reference to how this one is laid out. Because as I said, each water management does their own, and some cities do their own. Is there a PI key for the city? I don't know. The water management has their own. Do they have them up on their open data portal? Some do, some don't. You can usually find a contact somehow and get one from them. We do not, for St. John's, Swanny River in Northwest, we do not put it out there, but you can always request it from me, and it's almost 400 pages. I zip it and put on an FTP site, and you can come get it. I mean, I've had people from Atlanta to New York ask me for it. So the person in Atlanta was part of EPA, and they were dealing with 404 program with wetlands, and that's why he needed it, because somebody submitted something to them based on the statewide land use, and he needed the PI key to explain what he was looking at. So this is Southwest's land use PI key. They have an 1100 for low residential and no level 3s. Excuse me, I take that back. They have a level 3. It's called 1180. In the flux code, there is no 1180. They've created a new one for just themselves. And I think South Florida might also use this, or St. John's. I think it's St. John's. Everybody has this one. Once again, they only have a level 2 for medium density. So as you go down, you can see that they've picked and choosed in a way what they're going to use, but for the most part, it's all based on the flux, the number and the associated title description for it. There's some new ones in there, like abandoned tree crops. We don't use it in Northwest and Swanny. They use it primarily for the citrus that has been abandoned because of greening. I do believe that was the primary use for it. And so they do have it hot linked, I should say. And they do have kind of the same level ones, MMU, a description, a context. They refer to as cognitive features, exclusions, similar classes, mapping convention. They also have aerial image, both in color infrared or natural color, and then they have some local on-the-ground photos. So it's very similar to what we did for the Northwest and Swanny. But what I wanted to jump into now is what you see in this PI key, and this relates to the 2014 data. Does it relate to the 2017 or 2020 database that they have? All right, so I am looking at the 2017 from SwiftMud. I gotta refer to it as SwiftMud. Sorry for those people. They have this entire thing as streams and waterways, the 5100, with the exception of these two areas. They're calling a wetland, a 6000 is a wetland, a 5 is just water. So the emergent aquatic vegetation is in these two areas. So that's the 2017 database. If I turn on their new one, which I just got last month, the entire thing now is just the 5,100 streams and waterways. I do know they went to a new process. It's semi-automated. And I might talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, but mostly these are usually delineated by hand and eye. In other words, somebody's looking down and clicking and cutting this out or cutting that out or cutting this out. This right here, I think, is a park, but it's considered open land. Their MMUs might be different also. I think the MMU for a residential low density, 5 acres, but then it says 1 acre if found within irrigated agriculture. All right, so you really have to figure out 5 acres for any parcel that it's a residential home. They have their reasons. A long time ago, I'm talking 15 years ago or 12 years ago, I was told that they were flying every year their district and updating their land use based on that new imagery, mostly to identify areas that have been not permitted for certain activities or that were permitted and need to be verified. That's all I'm going to say for that. So going back to the image, so this is the new data. And let me go over and zoom to something over here, which is, this is that park, so I just zoomed in a little. Over here, what most people would look at this, especially on the ground, and say, hey, that's a stormwater pond. The district has it in here as a 6,000, which is a wetland. They have their reasons. They don't use what some of the other water management districts use as an 8370, which is a surface water feature collection. I can't remember the title. I've been doing this so long that just the numbers themselves tell me what it is. It's mostly dry, and that might be one of the reasons it's listed in here as an intermittent pond, because an 8370 is just the land use, where we would use this as an 8370. If it's full of water, what does the district do? Let's take a look. So down a little further, this is I-75, stormwater here. It's not intermittent pond, it's got water in it. Over here, it's got vegetation. They did leave it as a wetland classification for that. But across, now is this being fed by the interstate system? Actually, is this one being fed by the interstate system, or is it being fed by this other land use, which is listed as recreational? I'm not sure. The fact that there's drains here and possibly there, I would think that it is, but I'm not sure. One thing you can do is you could turn on the cadastral and identify if this is FDOT property. I don't know if I don't have it up on this particular project, so I can't look at that. This one over here is listed as the land use as a reservoir. One of the things I'll also point out is if you look at the attribute field for this, this is directly from them. They have a field called flux, as in the flux code, and the flux description. They have a level 1, level 2, 3, and 4, and they have a date stamp on it. If you look at that, where does it say anything about land use or land cover? So their database doesn't have a land cover. They only have a land use. The statewide, because I add this database to the statewide, the best I can do is copy the code from here, put it in the land use code field, and also put it in the cover code. So if I opened up the statewide land use database, well, taking a second, you'll have a land use code, you'll have a cover code. So in this case, for SwiftMud, for their data, it's going to be identical. Also, the land use code is going to be identical with the cover. This database, it was requested and I did it. I added a level 1 field and a level 1 description. So if anybody wanted to only look at the level 1s, they could use that. Also the level 2s. I did not do level 3s, and I could explain that, but it may take more time. Actually, I'll just quick. Let's go down to, yeah, here. So, no, that's not here. I'm not too sure which database I had it in. Oh, there's one of these. I think it's probably Northwest or, yes. So in the Northwest database, under level 3, you'll see, oh, should see, one of these has NA. It may not be the level 3, it may be the level 4. There's a level 4 somewhere. Yeah, there's a level 4. I wonder if they put it in here. Anyways, the fact that you can, there's some codes that only go to level 2, like a communication tower. You can't put a level 3 code in here because it's exactly the same thing as the level 2. So in the statewide, I did not put a level 3. You can create one yourself, but that's only if you need it. So I think finished talking about that. And the reason that these only show up as the number and the description as one entry. In a second, you'll probably see 2 entries. If I turn on these, nope, I take that back. Nothing here. Anyways, I usually label these as the land use and the land cover, because if you look at this one, you should have a different land cover for this. And let me take a quick Ganter. Yeah, in this case, it is not. Oh, I can't remember. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little ahead of myself or confused. For these, if you're running through a wetland, the cover code can be wet. I'd have to go back to the PI key and look at these. There's other cases where there's no different cover code, like railroads or roads. The low debt residential single family home, yes, it's got a different cover code. In this case, it's not called cover, it's called secondary. Keeping with the data structure of the last couple ones that we presented. So anyways, there's showing, what I was going to get to is showing the difference between when you have 2 things that are overlapping each other. In other words, a bridge goes over a waterway. Which land use are you going to use? It was decided long before I started that water trumps everything. In other words, if you have a river, cut out the river and you don't delineate the road or the bridge in this case. Could we have 3 codes instead of the standard 2, land use, land cover, and some arbitrary another one? Yes, we could, but we don't. Some water management districts have comments, some don't. I think Northwest is the only, this last one is the only time we've had a comment field, and that was because of Hurricane Michael. It was decided that they wanted to identify areas mostly wetland or forested areas. There's a couple of ag classifications that were heavily damaged, greater than less than 50% or greater than 50%, which polygons were heavily damaged. And so we went, as we did the delineation and the update, we put a classification in there. I definitely skipped this one part. And this is for everybody. This, I think I mentioned that every 3 years we get new imagery, and so every 3 years we end up doing new data. So the Northwest and Swanny have been done close to 5 times each since the first starting of the 2004 database. There's a couple earlier versions of it, but I don't think they did the same. They didn't have the same PI key and same structures as the ones from 2004 onward. And that's when some of these rules that we have went into effect, I think, like water cutting, everything. The one I showed you a second ago where the utility lines, they get cut by both road and railroad. There's some other things. If you have utility lines going between residential areas, usually they're not they're the new high power lines where it's a single pole, and so it's not as wide as these. But a lot of those is like, no, the residential trumps, and so you cannot put a utility line through that residential area. And there's a couple other ones, and they're not really listed anywhere. It's just part of the editing process that when we come across these, and usually, as I said, this has been done for 4 or 5 cycles now. A lot of that has already been done. I'm not going to say there's not new utility lines. There are, because they're next to I-10. They're putting in some right now, but we've already gone through the process of checking and double checking a lot of these already. So we'll skip ahead to something that's interesting to some sense. All right, let me turn this off. This is a boundary between the water management district. In here is Southwest Florida, over here is South Florida. When some water management districts build their data, they go outside the boundary for one reason or another. This, I do know some water management districts will go to the edge of the imagery. So they flew the image. It may not extend far beyond the boundary, but they decided to go to the end of the imagery. Other water management districts, this is South Florida, they did a buffer of their boundary and then did land use extending outside. When I put these databases into the statewide, I have to clip out these. And I'll show you some examples of what happens when you do. Make sure I'm in the right spot. So this area, blue is South Florida, red is SwiftMud. SwiftMud has a lot of level 2 codes. And what I was going to show you, and I think I talked about it briefly in the attribute table, is actually I didn't show you it. So under here, under all the different codes, you have a level 2s, but the PI key from 2014, true, it's 2 cycles ago. They actually had other versions. They had 1180. If you went down to some of the ag stuff, they had more than just 2110, which is improved pasture. They had unimproved. They had woodland pasture. They had some of the other ones. They've migrated their schema, or I don't know if that's the right word in a sense, to where they're not doing as many level 2s, as level 3s and levels 4s as they they have in the past. And this may be one of the cases. Back in 2017, what did they call it? They called it a level 3, an ornamental. So even 3 years later, they've gone away from the level 3, and now they're back to a level 2. The ornamentals fall within the nurseries and vineyards. And so depending on what area of the state you're working on and what you're really trying to get at, if the particular area is bordered by one or more water management districts, they also have different years. The red is 2020. The blue, in this case, is 2014 through 2016. So do you want the more up to date, even though it's a level 2? It's my whole thing about presenting this data is understanding the data itself, trying to figure out what you should not do, more particularly than what you can do with it. There is one section where 3 of these water management districts overlap each other. And some of them are more detailed than others. So look right here, you have a pink, you got a red, do you have a blue line? No, you don't. So the pink was the St. John's, the blue is Swift Mud, South Florida. So they do not distinguish between this apartment complex and this commercial and service. They don't cut out the water within here. Does Swift Mud do it? They do. They cut them out. This one is a lake. This is a lake. This is a reservoir. This is a reservoir. Why they're 2 separate ones, I am not 100% sure. They call this residential. They call that commercial and service. What does St. John's do? St. John's does the reservoir instead of lakes. They do 6440, which is the emergent wetland. But you also have to remember, this is 2014. Well, it's skewed because their actual data is from 2013 through 2016. It lists in the metadata which counties were done based on which years. If you go back and look at this, St. John's runs through both, I think, parts of Union and Bradford. It runs through all of these. It runs through Volusia all the way down. So they can have 3 separate years of imagery just for their district. And so it may be very hard for them to say, oh, this is all 1 year imagery. But they did, and they have their own reasons for that. But if you read the metadata, once again, understanding your data, you can identify certain things like this. So they went with reservoir. What is their PI key talk about in terms of the difference between reservoirs and lakes? I don't know. They also went with a stormwater pond, the 8370. There's probably a cover for that. Usually it's not 8370/8370. There's usually either reservoir. If it's filled with water, it's usually a reservoir, or they put, if it's a dry pond, they'll put a 3000 class in there, maybe. That's what we do. If there's a lot of wetland vegetation in there, we'll put a wet code in there. But it's a lot of times it's a 5300. But they did not cut out the reservoir, the commercial and service here. So each water management district does things differently. And there's always been consensus that, yes, none of them do it identical. Why don't we have one standard? Well, because they're all separate entities, they do it differently. The only reason Swanny River and Northwest are this basically identical is because DEP here does it for them with a lot of input, I should say, from them. All right, so I think I've talked about that. It's already 4 o'clock. I was going to talk about scale a little. Yes, at scale, it's the editing process. Where do you draw the lines of the boundary? This is a lake, or it's probably a lake. Where is the edge? Where's the delineated part? You can say that with every single land use. The road, where is the road? I'll go back to, is it this one? I think it was the next one, which is this one. No, sorry, it's this one. So we all know that FDOT is in charge of the interstates. Where is the boundary between what is DOT's right of way and what isn't? I imagine that this whole section of grass and this freshwater marsh with a whole bunch of pines in it is part of, I should say, the right of way for FDOT. This whole section down here, I would assume, is part of the right of way for FDOT. There may be even a swale to catch runoff and rainwater. Also, I'd like to point out at this point that they did not cut the road based on water. Is it a capture condition for the water itself? And the reason they didn't cut it out and then cut this, I don't know. I'm familiar for the most part with all the different water management districts, but since I work on Swanny River in Northwest, I'm very familiar with what we do there. But anyways, the reason this is still considered a woodland code is way back in the day when they probably first did this, there were trees. Now, were there enough trees to call this pine flatwoods? Yeah, that's pushing it, at least in my book. But should this get updated to where it's not? Once again, you have to look at their PI key and their capture conditions. My suggestion to them would be yes, I would revisit this part. And that's what I'm going to get to in just 1 second. I wanted to show you, to finish what I was talking about in scale, the lineation of features. At certain levels, at 1 to, let's go to 1 to 10. Can you distinguish this from this? I don't know, maybe. Can you distinguish this from this? Yeah, you should. I mean, that's open land in a sense. What's it for? I mean, who owns it? I have no idea. So there's a question about what scale do you edit? We've pretty much gone down to whatever you want to. If you can see it at 1 to 7,000, you should probably go down and kind of put it in. Once again, taking in mind remembering your MMUs. So looking at this particular parcel, if I had cadastral on, it could show me that this is not owned by anybody that is around here. This may be owner A, this is B, C. This may be owned by the county. I have no idea, or maybe by them. Should have this been delineated out and called something? It could have, but depending on their MMU, they chose not to, I assume. So, talked about scale a little. I'm going to cover one little thing before I move on to the last part, and this has to do with some of the problems you might run into. I don't have it here, but this is the Escambia River. It separates 2 counties, Santa Rosa and Escambia. I'm assuming it goes this side. Anyways, we do the imagery based on one county at a time imagery. We download it from our network. We build a mosaic raster of just that county and we delineate because it's so much faster than pulling the data through the network from the Oracle. I don't know if it's on the Oracle database, from servers someplace. We keep it local and we do it county by county. When somebody did I forgot which county they did. I think they did Escambia County first. This was completely dry. I'm looking at so did my notes have which years to look at? I don't think it does. So these images are being pulled from the server. So that is wet. If you turn on the line work was drawn based on it was relatively dry. Now the question is, it's relatively dry for a lot of this, but then you turn on the 2019 or is it 2016? I can't remember. I think it's the 2016. Oh, I'm not showing it. I'm not showing the right one. You can see that one of these, maybe it was the 13. There's no sandbars. So this is basically high tide. It's flooded. And there was a whole section of here that you would have to redelineate a whole bunch of line work because it was flooded. And we asked the Water Management District and they said, no, if there's a flood, just leave it the same. So what I'm saying is, if you come across something that doesn't look right, it may be you're looking at a different image that what the Water Management District or whoever did the land use from. And as I said, the Escambia River didn't show it flooded, but when we turned on the Santa Rosa one, it did show it flooded. And so we actually had to ask them and they told us what to do about that. All right, so that's what I'm going to talk about for this one. I'm going to quickly go into some of what we kind of do for some of the editing and that part of it, the QA part of the database. I picked a couple points. There's 11 of these, but I'm going to focus just on this one right now. So this is kind of how we set up our project. So when we edit, we have everything we need. I don't even have everything the photo interpreter has. I have National Wetland Inventory. I have soils. I have the cadastral. I have a DEM. He has a little more things. He has the NHD. I don't because I'm just the QA person. So I don't actually do a lot of the editing part. Anyways, as an editor, you start with the older version of the data. So this one is 2019 data, but it was originally the 2015/16. All we did was make a copy and rename it, and we're now updating it to match 2019 imagery. So in this case, it's simply, okay, you come across an area, what are you going to do to edit? Well, you select something. In this case, I can select more than one thing because I can tell that 4410, which is a coniferous pine plantation, there's no trees anymore. So they've all been cut down. One of the rules that we have, and it might be in the PI key and might not, that when these are cut down, they almost automatically go to a code of, what's the word? Forest regeneration. I just refer to as 4430. So I can change all three of these at one time by selecting on that. This is, oops, I made a mistake. This is where my job comes in because Alan will occasionally think he's pressing on this and he presses on something just below it or just above it, and then he moves on. So in this case, I did correct the wrong one, and you can click it. Okay, so I've updated them. Well, how does somebody know they've looked at it? So down here under the look field, we change it to yes. I have symbology set up to where I only see the numbers and I see the first letter as a different color to indicate that yes, that has been looked at, and it's both for me and for Alan, more for Alan than for me. And so he can move on to the next things. The next things could be, oh, yeah, that's correct, that's correct. And all he has to do is change the yes. He doesn't have to change the land use because it is what it is. It is, there's a, well, I take that back. You come up here, is there a mobile home in here? This is a fixed single family home. Is there a mobile home? There may have been, and one of the things you could do is go back in history and look. So go back to 2016 and yes, there was. And so what would I have to do? I would have to come in here and, well, let me go back and actually do a better job and split it. And now change this to, change this to, we've decided, let me just press that once a house is gone, we're going to categorize it as 7410, which is rural land in transition without indicators of activity. So once it's demolished, we don't know exactly what. Are they going to rebuild it? Are they going to clear it for something else? Are they going to put a commercial in service? What are they going to do? Are they going to expand this one? We don't know. And so we're going to change it. And a lot of times in this case, we're also going to change the cover code. So it's probably not fertilized, it's not maintained. It'll probably just go straight down into 3100 herbaceous grasses because we really don't have a better code. So it still has the yes on it. So I might have almost made a mistake and my QA person should have caught that. Open land is probably the hardest thing we have to deal with. This one is easy simply because what it used to be is probably some herbaceous grasses in the middle of this. Well, they tore it down. They cut all the pine down. Is there a chance they're going to replant and they're going to replant with this same regen? Yes. So you can simply go and merge into that one and then move on. So going back to talking about open land, oops, well, I didn't select these. These four. This is the worst part about this whole thing coming up in the open land. They're in a 2000 class. They're in a 2100 class, which is cropland and pasture land. If you can't tell if it's between crops and pasture land, this is the code you put it into. You want to keep it in an agricultural code, but you can't say it's any of the pastures. It's not a row field. It's a row crop. It's not a hay field. It's none of that. We don't, but it was at one point agriculture. Well, it was at one point agriculture, but hopefully this won't take too long. I'm turning on data that was from the previous cycles. So in 2010, this was the delineation. It was, I don't have a 2010 image up here. So it was 2610, which is fallow cropland. In other words, it was crops. They've decided not to farm on it, and therefore it's fallow. Same thing for this one. Same thing for this one. These three were all the coniferous plantations. So you can see where the cycle of change happened. At one point, it was cut out that this was pasture because in 2013, I do have that image. It may take a second to come up. If you zoom in, once again, scale issue, you can see there's trails. Is it a cow, is it goats, or is it a horse? I'm not 100% sure, but there is trails and it's fenced. If you turn the line work off and look at the image, you can see fencing all the way around. So that one was changed in the 2013 version, but everything else was kind of left the same. So in the 16/17 version, this is still 2100. These are still 2100. The question is, how long should they stay in something so they went from fallow to 2100. Something on this imagery told the photo interpreter that it's now an agriculture code. This is probably something that we should revisit more frequently. I may have suggested revisiting this. I can't really say. I could have missed it. I should have said something. I'll put it that way. Because based on this imagery and based on what it used to be and what it looks like now, I don't think these are ag anymore. They should not be in a 2000 class. The question is what to put them in. Do you put them in a 3000? I mean, you do see some trees, there's probably some bushes, but has the vegetation really changed a lot? In other words, is somebody coming out here and mowing it every 6 months, bush hog, whatever you want to call it? Maybe, I don't know. Are they prepping it? We don't know. So once something gets put into an ag code, it's kind of hard to get out sometimes. You kind of have to look for the justification to get it out and onto something else. And so looking at, oops, I didn't want to turn that one on. Good thing. So looking at this is like, should these be changed? I would talk to my PI key, photo interpreter and discuss and look at maybe some other things and try to figure it out. But that is what goes into when editing the database on our end. Ag and open field is the hardest to do. These are very simple, but they're time consuming. This is one polygon, but this section of it is not been cut. Has it been cut since this image was taken? What can you do? You can turn on maybe the NAPE imagery, which is 2020 kind of thing, and it's like based on this, they never did. So you can basically say, yeah, the 2019 imagery is what it is. So you cut it out and then you reclassify these to 4430, which is the forested regeneration. Let me go through a couple of these more quickly. This is something that if the photo interpreter hadn't updated, I would give him a dot for and say, hey, go back, update this area because there's cattle. And you can see where they go through between the irrigated fields and they end up going along with this. I would probably also suggest modifying the boundary of this to include this section. I mean, was it there back in 2016? No, they've actually expanded on it. So one of the things we do, you edit it, or you have the QA person, myself, come back and tell the photo interpreter, hey, may take another look or modify it. There's this one, it's called 2100, which is cropland and pasture land, saying we can't distinguish between them. Over here, it is a pasture. Over here, it's pasture. One thing you might want to look at is, once again, scale. At 1 to 7,000, can you see this white thing over here? Not with the line there, and the dot specifically, you can't see, but as you zoom in, you can see that these are hay bales. So the problem with the imagery we get for the panhandle, they're flown in the wintertime. We're not South Florida where you can grow things every month of the year. There's certain years where there's a lot not growing. You see a lot of fields like this one, they're plowed under. This one is probably ryegrass for the cattle for the wintertime, but the other cycles of the year where the growing season, it's row crop. We've been told by the Swanny River Water Management District, because of the imagery issue that we have with the when it's flown and so forth, a lot of the row crops are, all the center pivots are row crops. So we kind of did a blanket kind of thing. So when we see a center pivot and it's plowed under, even though you see cattle in it or it's a rye grass and cattle in it, they want it coded as row crop and not pasture. So for Swanny River, that's what we've done. But going for this one, can you kind of cheat a little and look forward and say, okay, 2 months from now, was it a hayfield? In other words, did you see the hay bales around? The answer is no. But up here, you see the rows for when back in 2019, it was just dirt or sandish. Um, let me look at open land. Once again, this is not in Dixie. I forgot what county I'm in. So I'll just turn on this one. This section, there's no buildings, there's no anything, there's trees, there's a stormwater pond. Who owns it? This is a university. Is it part of the university property? Should it be part of the delineation of the university? This, once again, open land is probably the hardest thing to say. It's in terms of acreage, it would add, I don't know how many acres to this university polygon, but should it? We decided for a lot of open areas like this to go with 1900, which is open land, and then put a cover code. You can put grass surface, but a lot of times we're just going to put 3100, especially when it's got a whole bunch of trees and there's some bushes and shrubs and so forth and so on. Is it the best thing we can do for what we have in terms of keys? Yes, I would say this would probably, it'd be efficient. Maybe not efficient's not the road. Anyways, open land, that is one of the issues we have. Here's another case where this is a prison. Well, the prison, yes, the parcel of the prison extends out. I mean, if you live here in Tallahassee and you drive up Capitol Circle next to the Federal Women's Correctional facility, you'll see big open areas of grass. It's like, yeah, they own that, but it's grass. So when people use this land use in some type of model, do they know for prisons that there's a lot of open area of grass? And is part of their assessment of calculating that? I don't know. So in a lot of cases, we'll leave these based on the cadastral. If there's some places in the Panhandle where they have farm within the cadastral of the what's it called, correctional facility, they will then cut out the ag field because it's ag in a sense, even though it's within the parcel of the correctional facility. All right, I think in terms of that, I think I'm going to might leave it there. I'm going to show kind of the quick and dirty of how the QA process is done. And so once an area is looked at by our photo interpreter, he's coded it as a yes, he's looked at it. I can select certain areas and only show the parts that he's looked at. There's a grid system, which I don't have this part turned on, that covers everything I've done. I might as well do this one too. So all I do is I look at areas that he's done, and once I've finished, I merge the grids into a vertical thing, and so I can, I'm gonna turn this back off because it drives me nuts. I can start at the top, and without this here, I'm usually at a scale of 2200, usually. At the scale, I can start here and just pan down and visually check to see if there's anything he's totally missed or I have questions about. And all I do is I come over and I put a dot down and I do some type of comment. This is my point field, and I'll just show you some of the comments. very simple. Put a 1390. In other words, if it's already coded 13.9, I'm questioning, should it be 13.9? Or if it's 1220, I'll say, well, isn't this really a 1390, which is a high density something? I'm usually not going to put it on a 12 something. It's usually a 1310 or something else. And it's like, no. So there's a whole bunch of, I do a lot of 1900s and 1920s, a lot of pastures, and then a lot of 8370s. In other words, are these stormwater ponds or not? And it varies on there's a lot of line works where you can see where the line work is just so bad. And I usually gauge it by, if it's greater than a half acre of bad line work, I'll put a dot down and he'll go back and he'll fix it. And as I said, these databases have been updated every 3 years for the last, 15 years now. Is that right? 16 years now. And so the line work should only be getting better and better, except for humans, go out and change things. And so this may be a regen at one point, and the next year you may see this little half acre section gone, and they're planning regen. So there's encroachment into, this is a hardwood wetlands. So that's one reason we go in and we modify this database, is for change. You can do land use analysis change based on different databases, and you can look, but a lot of times you'll get these slivers, and it's like, yeah, that's change, but sometimes the line work is just so bad, it wasn't necessarily change, it was just bad. Like I showed you down in down near the interstate on I-75, where we had the pine flatwoods just almost at the edge of the pavement. And it's like, yeah, to me, that's bad line work. It just needs to be moved over. And is that change? No, that's not really change. So I think that is it for me. So an hour and a half. I think my voice has had it. My doctor's not going to be happy, but does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Andrew. As Andrew said, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type it in the chat and I'll read them out to Andrew to get them answered.
Well, I appreciate everybody listening to me, even with the hoarse voice at the end. If you have any questions for the data statewide or Swanny River or Northwest, my name is in the metadata, and I suggest, yes, I know metadata, people don't like it, but I don't like putting it together sometimes, but there is useful information in there. So please, you can always email me. My phone number might also be in there. You can actually Google me. If for some reason my name is, if you put DP, FDP, maybe my name shows up somewhere. So.
Okay, we have someone asking if they could get a link for the PI key document. Is that something that you just want me to email you about, or is there an easy place to find the PI key document?
So as I briefly touched on that, all the different water management districts have their own PI keys. We here at DEP have the Swanny River and the Northwest Florida in one document. It is 400 page, almost 400 pages long. We do not put it on the FTP site because we do update it. And it would be a question of where we would put that link. The best thing to do was go to the point of contact for the data, and for, as I just said, for Northwest and Swanny, it's me, my name and email address and maybe phone number in there. You can contact me. I will put it on an FTP site and you can download it from there.
And we have James, who just said, nice job, Andrew, and good overview of the many considerations involved with producing the LULC.
Thank you, James.
Not seeing any more questions. Just want to say thanks again, Andrew, for your presentation, and thanks everyone for attending.